Hello everybody. Today we're going to learn how to manipulate text in a Linux console window or in a terminal window. And we're going to start with some fairly simple tools. We're going to learn about cat and head and tail and split. Now some of these, they sound silly, I'll admit, but head and tail are pretty simple. We're going to look at that in a second. Cat is actually not like a meow cat, it's concatenate. It's short for concatenate. And usually we use it to actually display the contents of a file. We kind of cat the information in a text file to the screen. We're going to demonstrate that in a minute. But first, let's deal with head and tail. So if you type head and then a file name, or you type tail and then a file name, it's going to give you either the first few lines of that text file or the last few lines of that text file. Now, this should make pretty clear sense, right? There's like the head or the beginning and the tail, the end. That's great. Now, where is this often used? Well, the tail command is used far more than the head command, and this is often used if you have a log file that keeps writing things to the end, as things happen, like your Apache log file, like, this is accessed, and then this is accessed, and this is accessed, and there's an error. Well, if you type tail, you can see the most recent events in a log file. So tail is something that's very commonly used in system administration. We're going to, again, go to the command line in just a second, but I want to talk about cat before we do that. Now, again, it's not meow. It's not your great cat, Thomas the Tiger or whatever. This is short for concatenate. And since it's most often used to display the text in a file on the screen, the concatenate name doesn't really make much sense. Like, why is it called concatenate if all it is, why isn't it just called print? And the reason is it actually takes a bunch of commands. So we can give it like 3 commands and it will display all 3 of those files. And it won't just display them, it will kind of paste them together or concatenate them and show them all at once. So while it's most often used to just display text on the screen, it actually can combine multiple files into a single file. So that's where the concatenate name comes from. And we're going to look how to do that as well. But just know that even though that's what it's named and that's what it can do, generally we just use it to display the text in a file. So let's go to the command line and check these out. We're going to talk about split as well, because split is kind of the opposite of concatenate, and it works just oppositely of concatenate. But anyway, let's go to the command line and check out head and tail, cat, and then split. So I've actually opened up 2 terminal windows so we can look at things while we manipulate things. So this is going to be the manipulation window. This will just be the display window. If we type ls, we'll see that I've created a file called file1.txt. Now both of these terminal windows are in the same directory. So I'm just going to type cat, C-A-T, and then the name of the file. Cat file1.txt, and it's going to print it to the screen. Remember, we just talked about cat, but cat, when it just has one file as an argument, will just display it to the screen. And this is basically our file. If you want to pause and read that, you can. I don't remember what I typed it on. I'm sure it doesn't make much sense. Anyway, we have this one file called file1.txt. Now, if we were to type head file1.txt, it's going to give us the first, I think 10 lines is the default. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yep, so 10 lines at the beginning. Head file1.txt, and then it gives us the first 10 lines of that text file. And if we look over here, sure enough, those look like the first 10 lines. That's exactly what we'd expect. Now with tail, I'm sure this isn't going to be a surprise, but it will do the bottom 10 lines. And if we look, the end, and it goes up 10 lines, sure enough. So over here you can see those are the bottom 10 lines of the file. And that's a great way to see when something is added onto the end of the file. You just type tail, the file name, and it'll show you the end. If we added something to the end of the file and we type tail, then it would show us that last line and not show us this line, right? It just shows us the last 10 lines. Now we can change the number of lines as well. We could say tail minus n for number of lines, 5, file1.txt, and it's just going to show us the last 5 lines. And you can do the same thing with 20, tail minus n for number of lines, 20, file1.txt, and I don't even think there's 20 lines here, but it just shows us all 20, it goes 20 lines up and it hit the beginning, so it just showed us the entire file. But that's a way you can do more than 10, but 10 is the default number of lines that it'll show you. All right, so we've seen cat, we've seen head, we've seen tail. Now the one other command that we're going to cover today is split. And split, while it's the opposite of concatenate, it actually has to work a little bit differently. So I'm going to clear this screen over here, type ls so we see what's in there, and then if we say split minus L for number of lines, let's say 5, the name of the file, file1.txt, and then the prefix for what we want the file split into. So I'm going to say file underscore. Now I know that this is a little bit frustrating because with the head and tail commands you use -n for number of lines, and with the split command you use -l for number of lines, and that's because L stands for lines. You can also split it by kilobytes or by characters, that sort of thing. We're just going to do lines, but just know that you can use split for something other than lines. Lines is just the easiest to look at in our example here. Anyway, so split into 5-line increments, -L 5. The file1.txt file that we've already looked at, and then the prefix is file underscore. Now this is just a text string. We can name this whatever, and you will see what happens in just a second. We do that, we get no feedback on the command line, which is why it's different than concatenate, right? There is no way that it shows us what it did, apart from if we type ls, it's created a bunch of files. And hopefully now this makes sense. We see split -L5, file1.txt, file underscore is the prefix, and so now file underscore is the prefix, and we have file AA, AB, AC, and AD. So now what does that mean? Well, it's split it into 5-line chunks. So if we cat file AA, oh sure enough, there's 5 lines of the text. You can look over there on the right and see those are the first 5. And now if we cat file AB, it's the next 5 lines. So it says, but it is here, so we'll look at it over here, but it is here, and then this is the 6th line, so we'll look at it. So it's broken it up into 5-line chunks. Now let's look at the other ones. 5 lines, and then this last one only has 4 lines because there weren't 5 lines left. It gives us a remainder. It's not like it's going to split it up into exact equal amounts and give us like 4.7 lines of text, right? It's going to go 5, 5, 5, 5, and then when it gets to the end, there's not 5 lines left, so it just gives us a 4-line chunk. But we have it split into those 4 different files. And now this is where the concatenate definition of cat makes a little more sense, because if we type cat, file AA, file AB, file AC, file AD, now remember, when you just display a text thing, you give it 1 argument. But if you give cat multiple arguments, it's going to concatenate all of these files into one, and it should display the exact same thing we have over here because it just concatenated those files together. And sure enough, that's what we have. If you pause and compare, this is the exact same output over here when we concatenate those files together. And cat not only will display to a screen, but we can also do this. We can say cat file AA, AB, AC, AD greater than to redirect the output. So instead of printing it to the screen, we're going to print it to new file.txt. And now if we type ls, we'll see we have this file called new file.txt. Well, let's look at that. Cat new file.txt, and then we have the whole file just like we did at the beginning. So split will cut it into chunks. Cat, when used properly, can paste it all back together into one big file or display them on the screen together. And that's basically what cat and split do. They kind of do the opposite, but they work differently. I mean, it makes, separate files when you use split. And head and tail are just that. It'll show the head of the file or the tail of the file. It's not really complicated tools, but they can be very useful, especially in specific circumstances. So remember, while the command is cat, it's not cat like meow. It's actually short for concatenate. But in my mind, every time I type cat, I just see a fuzzy cat as well. Head and tail does just what we showed. Shows either the beginning or the end of a text file. And split will chop up a text file into multiple things. You can do it by line numbers like we did, or by size, like 1 kilobyte chunks or whatever, and it'll just split it up like that. Manipulating text on the Linux command line is something that's very common, and it's not terribly difficult when you understand what the commands do. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.